Why don't you talk about maintainability? Hey, look, is he using some i3? Nice job. I, too, use i3.
So I usually don't like to talk about maintainability, right? Because maintainability is it has two ends, right? So the maintainability of the code also greatly depends on the ability of the person to maintain.
This is correct. This is absolutely correct.
The same with readability, right? So the problem with maintainability and readability is that people quite often look at them in a very one-sided way. They always assume that it's only responsibility of the code to be readable and maintainable, and never responsibility of the programmer to be experienced enough to read and maintain. There are two ends to this quality. It's how ready code is readable and maintainable, and how skillful is the programmer. That's why I don't really like to talk about this kind of stuff, right? Because it's a sort of like a double-edged thing. And when you really start to talk about it, people really get uncomfortable because that implies that they need to get good, and nobody likes to be told that they need to get good, right?
Yeah, that was fantastic. That's absolutely spot on. I have always had a bit of a problem with this phrase of, readability. Readability more so than maintainability. I think maintainability is a bit more objective of a measurement, meaning that how often are you able to produce features, right? Readability is like a function of your style and the time in your life. Every time I've ever written code, for me, it's been readable. Anytime I've ever looked back on code that's 6 months old, I think, wow, who wrote this malarkey? This is just a pile of terribleness. This is absolutely some of the worst stuff I've ever seen. Oh, wait, I am that writer. This is me. Oh, crap. Okay, well, let's back it up. Code, dude, first off, reading code is not easy, especially as your types get more advanced, as you have to go through a bunch more hoops just to understand what is the thing that you're looking at. There is definitely a function that exists, which is the complexity of the problem you're solving and the complexity of how you have to solve that problem, followed by how well you can read it, right? Not all code is just easily readable. Go ahead, open up Solid.js, go open up like the Svelte compiler, go open up React, go open up any of those, and I guarantee you're not going to be able to understand it in just an hour and a half. To be able to read it will just feel like you can't even understand any of it. That's just how it works. And I've tried this. So you're saying, oh yeah, well, what about like an LLM code explainer? Go ahead, toss it in an LLM and be like, can you explain this to me? They'll explain it in a high enough level that that's kind of what you derive as it is. You're like, oh yeah, I get this. This is a high enough level. But there's a huge difference between give me a basic explanation, give me a detailed explanation versus what the hell is actually happening. Right? That's very, very different. The amount of stuff you have to be able to hold in your head to understand what the code's actually doing is huge. And as of right now, like this project that I'm working on right now, I do... Oh,
welcome
my
to
goodness.
Costco.
I love you. I forgot to turn off alerts. Goodness gracious. But there's this project I'm working on right now where I honestly do not know how the entirety of the project works at all. And I have fixed several bugs. I put in some performance fixes. I've done some things, and yet I cannot figure out why or how this thing works in totality. Because it's just like, it's very, very difficult to gain like the actual context for really understanding it in its completeness or what's actually happening. It's funny. So to me, what I kind of see on this is that the code I'm working on is fairly maintainable, but I cannot read it. Right? Like I literally cannot read the code at all. I sit there and I look at it and I spend so many hours trying to figure out stuff, and it feels like it's just absolute wading through the difficulty. And so is it my fault? I would say that, you know what? Guess what? How can you maintain the code if you can't read it? Because I can read it in its little individualness, right? Like on this line, I can understand what's happening. I can put in enough print statements and kind of figure out my way through it, but I really don't fully understand what is going on. Documentation, there's documentation, but the problem is that documentation often exists only in one dimension. This function is to be able to maintain the tree of parents, blah, 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 blah. Okay, now when you look at what does it look like to maintain the tree, maintaining the tree is complicated AF. Stating what it does is really simple and kind of gives you like a little overview of what's going on inside of there, right? And so, like, I can read individual lines, but to actually understand it in totality is extremely difficult. And that's totally a function of what the complexity is that you're solving. And so are all code bases just simply readable? No. Like, you can read individual portions because you can follow code. Like, following 5 lines of code is just not hard. They're always readable. Following those 5 lines of codes in perspective of 100 lines of code, which is in perspective of 1,000 lines of code, is so effing difficult, you know? And so, is it maintainable? Yeah, I'm making features. I'm doing things to it. Is it actually something that, you know, is quote-unquote all these nice code ideas? No. Some of the functions are like, there's one function that's like 200 lines long. Why is it 200 lines long? Because it really is just doing the thing it should be doing. It's just hard. It's just complex as shit. It's just really, really hard. And here's the second thing about readability. Here's another thing about readability that's totally annoying that people don't talk about. If you love functional programming and you're used to functional programming, if you are used to OOP and you love OOP and you guys try to trade code bases, guess what's going to happen? Oh, this is not maintainable. Oh, this is completely unreadable. Oh, this is just the worst thing I've ever seen. Exactly. That's because maybe, just maybe, just a little bit, maintainability and readability is also a preference. It just might be a preference. And people sometimes make things out to be these like absolute, there is this one-dimensional measurement of readability is either not readable or completely readable. Give each other interfaces and be happy. I mean, I agree with you. Readability is a very, very subjective. So, I mean, because if you're not used to, if you read simple Rust, it's pretty simple. But if you don't know all the little idioms and all the little cool things people can do and all the functional nature of Rust, it's really, really, really hard to read Rust. If you don't know about lifetimes, it's hard to read about Rust. You've got like a whole skill issue gap that is combined. Have you ever read C++ just in general? When it starts dipping in and out of macros and it just keeps on going, some people look at that and they're like, oh yeah, it's doing this. Okay, yeah, it's doing this. Okay, yeah, it's doing that. It's awesome. It's easy. This is what's happening. Me, I look at it, I'm like, what the hell is even that? Like, I don't even know what's going on, right? Like, what is this? I don't even understand it. I don't get it. Comfort matters. I think one of the reasons why Go is so popular despite the bare syntax, because all the C system programmers that need to move to the backend network services love it. Yeah, like just last night, I tried to write a little client to send a message to a server and then read back that message and send a message and read back that message and just try out some various things because it's going to get a whole bunch of messages from a server, but it just needs to re-pick out the own message that it sent. And I just tried doing it. I wrote this in 8 minutes last night, maybe 12 minutes. I've never used this library. This is just the one that was there. I know there's like new ones that you should be using. This is just the one that was there. I did it literally in absolutely no time. And I was just like, holy cow. This is fairly easy. Like, you can do stuff pretty quickly. Can you read it now? Yeah. It's pretty simple, right? You got the room joining syntax. You got the message sending one where we measure the duration. And then I got my little read loop that's waiting to find the one that I sent. It's shocking how simple that was. For me, the first time I wrote a WebSocket in Rust, it took, goodness gracious, it took me probably 10 hours to really get to be able to write this program. It'd probably take me 10 to 20 hours to do this. First time ever doing it in Go took me 10 to 20 minutes, right? So is readability also an experience factor, and is it also in the language itself? Absolutely. Now I can write this kind of code pretty fast, but that's because it's obviously, I'm more familiar now with Rust. Anyways, I love this take. I think this take is fantastic. Readability and maintainability is not on the code itself. It's on the person. It's on their experience. It is partially in the code. It's also in the language itself. Some languages are just easier to maintain. Read the responses.
So I usually...
Absolutely. All right, full video. By the way, you should check out coding. If you don't watch coding, you're just a jerk. The impression, let's see, I get the impression you believe that these development skill issues are linear. That is not the case, as code bases live in a multi-dimensional, lossy conceptual spaces. I'm already too stupid to understand this. When new developers arrive, it's valuable to ensure that there is a diverse array of conceptual entry points for them. Whatever this means. Okay, so like, I know that we're about to get extremely memed on next. I can see what's about to happen. But the reality is, like, this sounds great and it sounds like a lot of words, but how does that actually happen? How do you actually do this? How do you actually do this in any real way, in any real code base? This sentence is practically impossible to do. This response is the only proper one. I get the impression that you don't mind that I spent last night with your mother. She was really impressed by my non-linear development skills. We explored the entire diverse array of conceptual entry points in a multi-dimensional lossy space. Yes, I've already liked this one because I already did read this one, okay? It was fantastic. It was a thing of beauty, okay? It was a thing of beauty. You can't get upset about this, but this first part, it sounds great on paper because I don't know what the hell it even means. Maybe I'm just too low IQ to understand terse code just by the syntax. I like the code aesthetics idea of code that explains itself even without comments and deceptive names or descriptive names. This doesn't exist. It only exists in the world's most simple things. Like there's not a person on earth, even if you're completely unfamiliar with Go, like you would just have no problem here. I'll let Copilot do it. There you go. Like, of course this is simple to understand, right? That's because there's nothing to it. There's absolutely nothing to this code. Of course it's simple. But anytime you're doing anything sophisticated, the reason why code reading is so difficult is because you have to understand the concept, you have to understand the representation, and then you have to understand the syntax that's trying to, like, manipulate those two things. I don't necessarily see, you know, why people get so worked up over this thing. Friends, what about the trade between readability and optimization? I'm not fully even on the team of readability, okay? I know it exists, and I've been in some code bases that are genuinely bad, but about 90% of it is just people's opinions getting all upset and getting emotionally hurt. Thank you, Phoenix Rising. I agree, disagree, kind of. Code is created for a community between folks. Even if the code is good, it may not fit mental model of reader. So the reader has to change and fit its mental model to the code. Then the question becomes, what can I do to lower this tension? But as you said, it's a relationship rather than objective quality. It's interesting how everyone is trying to reduce the friction, but only few explore the idea of increasing the friction for certain kinds of developers you want to keep away from your project, which may be beneficial in a long run. But we are not allowed to talk about that. That is such a great one. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, let's go! And so how do I take this phrase? Do I think that he's just, I think there's two ways people read this. There's probably my camp, judo camp, and a few other people's camps, and then there's another camp. And so camp number one is just like, oh, this guy just, you know, the elitist camp, right? I saw someone say, oh, he's just being elitist, which is, okay, what he really means by that is he just wants nobody that's inexperienced, so he intentionally makes his code hard, and that's that. First off, again, readability, hugely subjective. So he writes his code that is, say, pretty standard, pretty decent C. That's my guess about coding. And so what I think he means by this is that code and getting into a project is difficult. The people we want are people who are going to push into the difficulty, take the time to learn it, morph their reading skills into understanding how this code base was written, and then try to contribute to it. That's the person I want. I want the person that's willing to put in the work, that's willing to take the time, that's willing to actually do the hard things. That's the person I want. That's how I read it. And that's how I'm totally on that team, right? I'm on the team that is, I want the person that's driven and wants to go, like, and wants to understand the problem. Let's see if I could increase the friction for people who refuse to highlight the entire word on the stream, it would be I would up the friction 100x. What? I did highlight. Look, I even highlighted the entire word friction. Like right here, I highlighted that entire word right there when I had the whole thing. It could this could be justified to write poorly written code. I want to hear more about this because here, hold on, we're doing it. We're debating. Hop in. Get in the arena. Get in. Tell me. How do you measure poorly written code? How do you qualify any of these phrases that you're saying? Because I don't think I see this as any problem with poorly written code. Like how are you going to define this problem? Functions with multiple concepts, not using proper patterns, etc. Do you think functions with multiple concepts is always bad? I don't think functions with multiple concepts is a pure bad. I don't. Sometimes you gotta kind of do a couple things like that. I actually have zero problem with that. The proper pattern shit is so unrealistic in an environment where you need the shift. It is. It's very, very difficult. Like I get that there are some level of patterns that are good. Effectively, I just don't see what the benefit of that. You just don't see the benefit. Okay, that's fine. You may not see the benefit. The problem is when you say phrases like code is going to just be written poorly. I would honestly love to see you I'd like you to go through any project at all on GitHub that you've never looked at. The code's going to look bad. Of course it's going to look bad. It doesn't look like you wrote it. It doesn't look like the way you like to write today. It looks like somebody weird-ass different code that does things in a way that you don't like, and that's that. Like, that's just how life works. Now, you can get used to it. Now, you can just simply become good at committing to someone else's code style. I'm regularly impressed by code bases. I have never been impressed by a code base. I have literally never been impressed by a code base. I've been impressed by how somebody solved a particular problem once. Like I've looked at how someone solved a particular problem and I went, wow, that's pretty cool. I don't look at code bases as pathetic. I just look at them going, wow, that's not how I'd want to do it. And second, okay, so then patterns. There's like a few patterns that are really, really great. There's some patterns that are very, very fantastic. I'm impressed how people make monorepo work. I'm fine with monorepos. I think sometimes they're really, really nice. Sometimes they're really, really annoying. I'm impressed by the lazy Vim code base. I'm sure if I were to, I am pretty good at NeoVim. I am pretty good at the NeoVim API. I'm pretty good at Lua. And it's still hard. Like, I go into a bunch of code bases trying to figure out how, configs and things are set and what actual options do I have available. And it's difficult. Shut up, TJ. Like, it still takes time. And I'm like, oh, I wouldn't have written it this way, but this is pretty cool, right? I'm not impressed. I'm just like, oh, it's another way to do things. And I wouldn't want to do that. And then it's like, okay, whatever. Like, that's just how it goes. Strategy pattern. Strategy pattern is the ultimate pattern. The rest, mediocre. Okay, enough of this crap. I actually like this. I love this take. I think this take is fantastic. I think that people will be I think you'll have an incredibly easier time in life if you quit trying to make this code in some sort of aesthetic, amazing piece of something, but instead just accept the fact that coding is largely uncomfortable, that it's largely not going to be the way you want things to be, that it's largely going to be kind of annoying and takes time to get up to speed, that readability is going to be an exercise of patience and time, and just simply let that happen, and then all of a sudden you're just not going to be nearly as pissed, right? Because the reality is that at some point, every single code base had to make trade-offs for delivering. Every single code base has to make concessions for delivering. That's all there is. It sounds like defeatism. It's not defeatism. It's realism. I would love to see some code base that was able to deliver real value to real people in which they could take all the time they want to design the most elegant system. Okay, this is not academia where people get to sit in a room doing UML diagrams for 6 months. There's never a perfect solution. There's always trade-offs. Because even the solutions that are good, requirements change. And they no longer fit well, right? They no longer fit well anymore, and now you have to make concessions, right? Like, there's just no possibility. So you agree with? Yes, of course I agree with him. Yeah, let's see. Obviously, you haven't seen my 100-line homework for object-oriented design. This is fact. This is fact. This is a fact of life. Another case of choose your hard. In some sense, not everything can be, again, you just have to make concessions. You get to choose your concessions you make, and sometimes you don't get to choose those concessions at all. They're just chosen for you based on timelines. And sometimes it completely sucks. That's just that. All right, the name is, I'm pretty much in the train that most things are just subjective, and in that this large push for some sort of objective code quality is just really just a lie. Agent.